Hey, what's up, guys? The AYN Thor might be one of the most interesting handhelds you can buy for RPGs. Between its dual OLED displays, reasonably powerful processor, and the sheer number of systems it can emulate, there's just a ridiculous number of games you can play on this thing. So today I've picked out 10 RPGs that I think really show off what the Thor can do. This isn't a list of the top 10 greatest RPGs ever made. It's a collection of games from a bunch of different RPG traditions, and each one has a little something that makes it particularly worth checking out on this handheld. So with that out of the way, let's get right on into it, guys. Let's start with one of the most unusual games on this list, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, another great game by Vanillaware and Atlas. Trying to describe this game in a single genre is basically impossible. It's part visual novel, part strategy game, part RPG, and somehow also a giant sci fi mystery involving time travel, aliens, robotic kaiju, and a whole lot of teen drama. The story follows 13 different protagonists' lives kind of generally start intertwining, and the way that the game tells this story is honestly one of the coolest things about this game. You jump between their perspectives and these different points of time, trying to piece together what's actually happening, and slowly kind of draw together and realize that all these seemingly unrelated stories are part of the same massive puzzle. Then you get into the combat sections where you actually deploy these characters in these real-time battles against waves of kaiju. There's a surprisingly deep a bit of customization and progression here underneath what's otherwise a pretty simple-looking interface, so there's a real RPG element here, even if I wouldn't exactly call this a traditional RPG. Once again, Vanillaware's hand-drawn art style absolutely stuns here, but so do the bright, colorful effects during the RTS sections. The story and visual style are very much the stars here. The game is basically Persona meets Terminator meets Pacific Rim, and it's glorious in the Thor. Whether you think it's an RPG or not, do not miss this game. Next up is Shin Megami Tensei 4, one of the best reasons to play a 3DS RPG on the AYN Thor. You play as the samurai Flynn, who's trying to navigate a cataclysmic conflict involving demons, religion, and the fate of Tokyo. I'm keeping this one intentionally vague on the story because, like all SMT games, the story is one of the best parts here. The real star of SMT4, though, is, of course, the demon system. You recruit demons, fuse them together, create stronger ones, customize their skills, and constantly experiment with your party. There's a ton of different combinations, so building a team that works for you is very much a part of the game's main loop here. This remains one of those games that unfortunately remains banished on the 3DS, but that makes it a perfect candidate for the Thor, where you can keep the map, menus, party information, and other UI elements on the second display while keeping the main action on the top OLED display. It almost feels like this is what the 3DS version has been waiting for. SMT4 can also look surprisingly decent here, with some of the HD portraits packs available online, and in the typically Atlas way, the soundtrack is excellent. There's some challenging combat, and it has that bleak SMT atmosphere. With all of that in mind, you've got an RPG here that is uniquely well suited for the Thor. Next up is probably the biggest name on this list, Dark Souls Remastered. At this point, I don't think I need to explain what Dark Souls is. It's one of the most influential action RPGs of the last few decades, and its name alone has helped to define an entire genre of difficult games. The Switch version of this game had some graphical issues through emulation, but it is now finally in a pretty good state. Dark Souls Remastered looks surprisingly good on the OLED screen now that it's here, and the game feels much more natural than I expected it to. The combat is deliberate rather than flashy. Every attack, dodge, and healing opportunity matters, and learning enemy patterns is just as important as how you improve your character. There's plenty of RPG progression underneath that combat too, with stats, weapons, armor, spells, and different builds, allowing you to approach the game in a few different ways. And while Dark Souls might be the most obvious game I've picked for this list, I think it's worth including particularly because it feels so good to finally have it playable in this form factor. If you want a genuinely substantial and difficult action RPG that you can carry around with you, it's pretty hard to argue with Dark Souls Remastered, although Demon Souls is finally in a decent place as far as PS3 emulation too. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2 Grimoire of the Rift on DS. This is the tactical game that is a sequel to my favorite Game Boy Advance game of all time, Final Fantasy Tactics, which is itself a spin off of the original Final Fantasy Tactics. It follows a very simple plot based, very much similar one as the original. The protagonist gets in their real life kind of brought through a book into this fantasy world of Final Fantasy, and they end up joining the local clan and kind of discovering what's going on here. And it looks very similar to the original Game Boy Advance game if you've ever played that. But it's just a really great tactical game. There's some nice visual effects here on this DS version, and it's really at home on the Thor. It's a great two-screen experience, and if you like tactical games at all, you cannot go wrong with Final Fantasy Tactics A2. Next up, we have Star Ocean The Second Story R, which, depending on your taste, might be one of the best looking RPGs you can play on the AYN Thor. This remake combines some really well done 2D pixel art sprites with more modern 3D environments, giving it a really distinctive look that pops on this OLED screen. It manages to take what Octopath Traveler did with this sort of modern remake style and do its own thing with it. You can choose between two protagonists here, Claude and Reyna, and there's a surprisingly deep RPG system underneath what is already an interesting space fantasy story. You have real time combat, extensive character customization and relationship management, a bit of crafting, and just generally a lot of ways to build out your party. That depth is really what makes Star Ocean 2 stand out here. You can play through the story normally or spend hours messing around with its systems and just totally breaking your characters. And on the Thor, it's just a fantastic combination of great visuals, active combat, and some great deep RPG mechanics. Also, if you want to save some power with this, the PSP versions of this game and the first Star Ocean are pretty solid as well here. Harvest Moon 3D A New Beginning. What would a RPG list be without a chill farm sim game? There probably isn't much I can tell you here that you don't already know about this game. If you've ever played something like Stardew Valley, you're gonna know exactly what to expect here, minus the pixel art sprites. You've got a farm management, livestock, relationship simulation. You can go out and forage in the wild and build buildings on your property. It's very much the same DNA that it always has been with the Harvest Moon games, and honestly, that's okay. It's still a really good, enjoyable game. All of these games are. Even the DS games are honestly pretty solid. So if you like the farm sim games at all, absolutely check out this one on 3DS. And next up, we have one of the granddaddies of the JRPG games, Dragon Quest V. This is the DS remake because, of course, in the West, we did not get the original SNES game, but this DS remake is an excellent way to play this game. It's obviously about as traditional as it gets when it comes to JRPGs, and if you don't like those sort of turn based systems, you probably already know that, but without me telling you, but this is a great game. In my opinion, this is one of the best Dragon Quest games. A lot of people like to talk about Dragon Quest VIII with very good reason, but this is definitely among the best as well. It's a multi generational story, starting with your main character's father, and then your character grows up and goes on to have their own children. And the story is pretty excellent by 90s JRPG standards. There's a prison break sequence and all sorts of traditional sort of dark magic and things. And if you like JRPGs at all, you've probably already played this game, but if you haven't, absolutely give it a try. There's also a really great fan translation in English for the PS2 game as well. So if for some reason you don't like the pixel art sprites, the sort of more 3D ones in the PS2 remake might be more your speed. Great game. Absolutely check out really all the Dragon Quest games on DS, but especially check out this one. Next up, we have another tactical RPG, Triangle Strategy, which still absolutely impresses every time I see it on an OLED screen. It uses Square Enix's HD 2D art style that they perfected with Octopath Traveler, using a combination of pixel art sprites and 3D environments and modern lighting. The combat is a classic tactical RPG with grid based battles where positioning, terrain, elevation, and character abilities all matter. There's a good amount of depth here to building out your party, but it never really feels like you need to understand a million different systems just to get this game going. The story is also a major highlight here. It follows Serenoa Wolfor and his companions through the story of political intrigue, impactful choices, and multiple pathways depending on those choices. This Game of Thrones esque pixel art epic is an obvious choice here, but sometimes there's a reason why a game is obvious. Don't let the weaker name here deter you. This game is a winner.
Yes! Shall we make it a contest, my friend?
Our second to last game on this list today is a little bit of a deep cut, Lufia Curse of the Sinistrals on the Nintendo DS. If you've ever played the classic SNES RPG Lufia 2, you might recognize the name, but this game takes that story and completely reimagines it as an action RPG. Instead of the traditional turn-based combat, you control the characters directly with fast-paced battles, different abilities, puzzles, and plenty of exploration. It feels honestly more like a traditional East game than it does one with the Lufia name. And being a DS game, it also makes good use of the Thor's dual screen setup. You get the original experience, but with those OLED displays at 5x upscaling, it feels pretty clean. It's definitely one of the least obvious games on this list, but that's exactly why I wanted to include it. If you want something a little bit different from the usual RPG recommendations, this Lufia game is worth checking out. Last up today, guys, where would a good RPG list be without a BioWare game? We've got Dragon Age Origins, one of the most legendary RPGs of its era. It's still an incredibly deep game. The choices that you make matter, some really incredible characters, some solid voice acting. This is the game that helped define what a Western RPG could be in the late 2000s. And honestly, it's hard to match it even today unless you want to talk about something like Baldur's Gate 3. But this is still a great game. It's a little clunky to play here through game native, so it's a little choppy without native controller support. Maybe try out the 360 and PS3 versions for a little bit more there. But honestly, do not miss this, especially if you like games like Mass Effect or Knights of the Old Republic. That's going to do it for me today, guys. If you like this kind of video, drop a like for me. I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.